Facial recognition cameras are turned on and recording both adults and children in some of Australia's biggest retailers. Bunnings and The Good Guys both admitting they use the cameras, and it's got Australia's leading consumer advocacy group Choice calling for action. Let's break this down with futurist Michael McQueen. Good evening, Michael. What do you make of the move by these big retailers? Unethical?
Yeah, good evening. Well, I mean, in one sense, there's a discussion about is this legal to do, but the bigger question is, how do consumers actually feel? You know, do they feel comfortable with this? 76% of consumers said they didn't know this was going on. And I think the bigger issue right now for retailers is, does this erode our trust with them? Do we feel comfortable going to the stores? And this is a big discussion right now around the world in lots of countries trying to figure out how do we navigate this legally, but also ethically.
Michael, you actually say that this is part of a global movement to gather more of our personal information. Can you explain that further to us?
Yes, so, I mean, companies are all scrambling to develop data sets, and then one of the most valuable data sets is anything to do with, you know, our biometrics, be it our fingerprints or be our facial recognition technology. But you've also got a big pushback right now happening from consumers, but also from government. So, for instance, in October last year, the Parliament in Europe actually passed a law banning facial recognition technology being used in public spaces, also banning companies from developing databases of this stuff. Coincidentally, 3 weeks later, Facebook stopped using facial recognition technology on the app and online for any videos you posted online or photos you posted, and they've deleted their database entirely. So we're still trying to figure out how to navigate this, but there's a lot of discussion and debate going on, and for good reason.
All right, we have a few questions from our viewers. Teresa Caetano asks, why do shops need them?
Well, so the message being given to us by the retailers is this is about security, and this is about monitoring for things like theft. But in reality, this is actually a really valuable marketing tool if this stuff is used well. And when I say well, as in used effectively by the retailers. So, for instance, you're seeing this being used overseas in other places. In Germany, Aldi have begun to use facial recognition technology at their cashierless checkouts to identify if you are old enough to buy alcohol. So if you are, seen to be too young, this will be a challenge for the Botox crowd, of course, but if you're seen to be too young, you can't buy the alcohol without checking with a human cashier first. Then you see Walgreens in America have developed facial recognition refrigerators. It'll actually identify the age and the gender of the person standing in front of the fridge in the refrigerated aisle and change the advertisements on that refrigerator based on the person standing in front of it. So it's about personalising the experience. That's ideal, but also could be seen to be a little bit creepy.
Goodness, where will it stop? Scott Burgess says, shouldn't we be allowed to on-sell for marking? We should own that right, just like we should own the rights to all the data that we create on our phones.
Yeah, and this is a big discussion, like who owns the data. So there's a company called Clearview AI, and that's actually started by an Australian dude who's living now in the US. They've got a database of 20 billion faces. And interestingly, we saw last month in the US, they were banned from selling that technology and database basically to private companies. So this discussion about who owns this technology, because most of their database has been created by scraping social media and online. So like you or I and most of the viewers this afternoon and this evening, their faces are in this database right now. So who owns that data is the really important question.
Warren Phillips says, ever walked around a capital city? They've been using this technology for years.
Yeah, they have. In fact, a number of councils in Australia have been using this. I know Darwin City Council got into a bit of hot water because they were rolling this out about 2 years ago, and the idea was to deal with any social unrest in the main streets. But there's a lot of pushback. This idea is different from having CCTV footage, where you've got rolling footage of what's happening, as opposed to identifying people as they move around spaces. And this is probably the area around privacy. We're going to have to really grapple with this over the next little while.
Nikki Bell writes, good luck with face masks on everyone. It would become so inaccurate, I'd assume.
Well, it does, but the most recent update that Apple have pushed through allows you to unlock your iPhone now with a face mask still on. So they are finding ways around this, but there's no doubt it's a whole lot more tricky. I mean, you and I can't figure out who we're talking to when they're wearing face masks, much less the technology, but there are ways around this, and the technology is getting incredibly clever.
And finally, Jared Jones asks, so can I sue them for invasion of privacy?
So at the moment, the legal precedent's pretty dicey here around this. The bigger issue, though, is this issue of trust. And for any brand or business, trust is their most important commodity. So if your customers are feeling like you've, infringed on their privacy and they don't feel comfortable going into stores, that's a really big issue. Because there was a time where transparency was a choice, For any brand, it's not anymore. You've got to be super upfront. It's not enough to just say, it's on our website in our privacy policy. No one's read that thing. You need to be far more upfront with this, and it's not a little sign near the entrance. So I think for retailers, that's the bigger question, is how do they rebuild affinity and trust with their customers after something like this?
Because most customers probably will want to know that they're being filmed. Futurist Michael McQueen, thank you for your time this evening.
My pleasure.
A sunny winter Thursday as we look ahead to the weekend.